One of the hardest aspects of writing for me is, and this tends to be very true for short form, not so much for novels, but a major challenge that I face often is the balance between sensationalism and believability. I'm not really sure if there's a better way to put that, but you'll notice this a lot with stories that tend to push the envelope a little bit. Ones that tend to challenge a lot of taboos. Is often there's a degree of sensationalism. The characters do the wildest of things, right? The drugs, the sex, whatever, and it's a bit too over the top to actually be believed in a sense. Someone like maybe like a Dennis Johnson, for example, right? I'm thinking of like that short story he did about the EMTs there, the ambulance workers, whatever. For those that maybe have read the story, you'll know what I'm talking about, where it's like this absolutely wild and out account that is just so that's awesome. It's very entertaining. It's awesome, but and it's perhaps not quite believable. It's just maybe just too over the top. And for me, I tend to fall often with my short stories in kind of that same realm, where it's entertaining, and if you give me a little bit of leeway, in terms of believability, you're gonna absolutely love the story. But often for me, when it comes to these stories, it's trying to write these things that are outrageous and wild, or that contain very shocking sort of accounts, but trying to maintain just a small sense of believability towards it. For me, that often comes down to kind of drawing from real life experiences, as far as like the way to kind of keep yourself on that track. If I can sort of draw from things that I've experienced before, and maybe just turn things up just a little bit, just turn that dial maybe just like one notch or something like that, I tend to find that I fall within a pretty good range of stuff that is believable. I don't think I've ever submitted a story for publication that's ever been rejected because they thought that the account was too far-fetched or too out there in terms of what happens. And in truth, a lot of the stuff that I write and a lot of stuff that I read even, that people may at first think is a little bit too out there, a little bit too beyond the pale. If you've ever, like in real life, experienced people that have gone through those same kind of experiences, that sort of desperation, that sort of poverty, come from very come from less structured environments, it's honestly not too far from the truth. They do say truth is stranger than fiction, and it's often is. But with our work, you're writing to someone else who will read your story, and often the reader is not going to be from that background. The reader is going to be an outsider who's going to be fascinated by what you write. And if you do write too stuff that's too out there, too far-fetched, they're going to not believe the piece, and that does create a little bit of a problem. And so I think readers in general will give you more leeway. I think that readers will give the writer a lot more ground to be a little bit crazy, a little bit outrageous than you might think. But what will help a lot is seeing other writers and other authors that are also publishing the same kind of thing, and seeing how far their stories go, and kind of sensing, okay, so this guy here, Okay, he has a story that's got this really wild premise. Okay, probably not true. Probably there's probably too many safeguards in society to kind of keep this particular thing from getting, going to the extent that it does. The story doesn't spiral out. Probably wouldn't spiral this far out of control before being, before the characters are stopped or whatever. But they seem to get this published here. People seem to enjoy it, and I'm entertained by it. So let's keep it that level. Let's aim for what would realistically happen, and then just go just a notch above it. That's how I've always kind of operated when it comes to this, and so many of my stories, especially my early stuff, face that kind of challenge of like, okay, is this really believable? Could this really occur? Does this really happen? And even when it does, it's difficult to convince others that it's true, that it actually has occurred. So I think scaling it back to what's believable and going a little bit above is probably the best way to do it. But it's always a judgment call. It's always a challenge. And again, every time I go into some story, I feel like half the time these stories that I'm writing, even the ones for this collection, that'll be coming out, now at this point, probably in a couple of years. I'm always debating if these stories are believable, if these stories are just too far-fetched, and I think I always fall within like a good boundary of believability, but who knows? But it's definitely one of the roughest considerations. So perhaps just realism plus a little bit of sensationalism is probably the best way to go about it.